Among the great rivalries in American sports, only one can be truly called the continuation of a war. The deep seated animosity between Kansas and Missouri wasn't born on a football field. It was forged in the fire and blood of the Civil War era, in a brutal guerrilla conflict that earned the territory the name Bleeding Kansas. To understand the genuine hatred that fuels this rivalry, we must go back to the morning of August 21st, 1863, as a quiet dawn was about to break over Lawrence, Kansas. Residents stirred in their beds, unaware that 450 Confederate guerrillas had spent the night riding hard across the Missouri border, their horses lathered and their intentions deadly. By dawn, William Clark Quantrill's raiders were positioned on the outskirts of town, preparing for what would become one of the most brutal civilian massacres of the American Civil War. For the next 4 hours, Lawrence burned. When the smoke cleared, at least 150 men and boys lay dead in the streets, and the business district was reduced to ash. The raiders had specifically targeted Lawrence because of its reputation as the heart of the abolitionist movement and home base for the infamous Jayhawkers, militant Free State settlers who had spent years conducting their own raids into Missouri. This was not random violence. This was the climax of nearly a decade of border warfare that had earned Kansas territory the grim nickname Bleeding Kansas. And from this bloodshed would eventually emerge one of college football's most intense rivalries. For Missouri, a slave state since 1821, the prospect of a free Kansas threatened both their economic interest and their political balance in Congress. Missouri settlers, dubbed border ruffians by their opponents, began flooding across the border to influence Kansas elections. On March 30th, 1855, thousands of armed Missourians illegally crossed into Kansas territory for the first territorial election. They not only cast fraudulent ballots but stuffed ballot boxes with hundreds of fictitious votes, ensuring a pro slavery legislature despite Kansas having few actual slave owning settlers. The anti slavery settlers, many of whom had been funded by New England abolitionists, established their own government in Lawrence. This town, founded by the New England Emigrant Aid Company and named after Boston philanthropist Amos Lawrence, became the unofficial capital of the Free State movement. Both sides now claimed legitimate authority, setting the stage for what historians would later term Bleeding Kansas. The first major outbreak of violence came in May 1856, when pro slavery forces invaded Lawrence, burning the Free State Hotel and destroying abolitionist newspaper offices in what became known as the Sack of Lawrence. Though no one died in this initial attack, it ignited a guerrilla war that would rage for the next 3 years. The bitterness from these early conflicts became so ingrained in the region's identity that decades later it would seek a new battleground, the football field. The violence was intensely personal and brutally efficient. Free State militants called Jayhawkers, named after a mythical bird said to attack its prey without warning, conducted nighttime raids into Missouri, liberating slaves and burning pro slavery settlements. Their Missouri counterparts, known as Border Ruffians and later Bushwhackers, responded with equal ferocity. By the time Kansas achieved statehood in 1861, dozens, roughly 56 by some counts, though others estimate higher, had died in the territorial violence. When the Civil War began, the border warfare intensified rather than subsided. Kansas Jayhawkers, now operating under federal authority, expanded their raids deep into Missouri. Senator James Lane, a prominent Kansas politician and military leader, led devastating attacks on Missouri towns. The most notorious occurred in September 1861 when Lane's forces completely destroyed Osceola, Missouri, executing 9 men and leaving the town in ruins. Missouri guerrillas, operating as Confederate irregulars, sought revenge for these attacks. Quantrill's raid on Lawrence represented the culmination of this cycle of violence. The specific targeting of Lawrence had multiple motivations: the town's symbolic importance as the heart of abolitionism, its role as headquarters for Jayhawker operations, and personal vendettas held by Quantrill and his men against specific Lawrence residents. The massacre had been carefully planned. Quantrill's raiders had ridden for nearly a day straight to reach Lawrence. They carried lists of prominent Lawrence residents marked for death, including Senator Lane, the very man who had led raids into Missouri. He only survived by fleeing into a nearby cornfield in his nightshirt as the town burned behind him. The aftermath was swift and terrible. 4 days after the massacre, Union General Thomas Ewing issued General Order Number 11, forcing the evacuation of 4 Missouri counties along the Kansas border. Jayhawkers under Charles Doc Jennison then burned everything left standing, leaving western Missouri a wasteland marked only by standing chimneys, structures still called Jennison monuments in local parlance. The guns eventually fell silent. The war ended, but the memory and the hatred remained. It festered for 25 years looking for a new outlet, and in 1890 it found a surprising one in the brand new sport of college football. The Civil War had ended, but the cultural memory of the border violence lived on, embedded in the very identities of the two states' flagship universities. When the University of Kansas organized its first football team in 1890, it adopted the name Jayhawkers, later shortened to Jayhawks, directly linking the school's identity to the militant Free State fighters who had raided across the Missouri border during the Civil War era. Missouri's choice was equally deliberate. That same year, Missouri students chose Tigers to honor the Fighting Tigers of Columbia, a Union Home Guard militia formed in 1864 to defend the town from Confederate guerrilla raids. These weren't just mascot names, they were battle flags, carrying forward the ancestral grievances that had defined the region for decades. When Kansas and Missouri first met on the football field in 1891, they were not simply college teams competing, they were the athletic embodiment of historical enemies. But no one could have predicted that 116 years later, this same matchup would become the single biggest game in the country, a primetime spectacle to decide the nation's number one team. The first game between Kansas and Missouri took place on October 31st, Halloween, 1891, at Kansas City's Exposition Park. The Kansas City Star's coverage began with a direct reference to the historical border war, establishing from the very beginning that this was more than just another football game. Kansas won that inaugural contest 22-10, but the series would prove far more competitive over time. The early years established the framework for what would become known as the Border War. From 1893 onward, the game was traditionally played on Thanksgiving Day in Kansas City, neutral ground that emphasized the regional rather than purely collegiate nature of the rivalry. These weren't just university contests, they were events that drew entire communities from both states, with Kansas City hotels packed and special trains running from Lawrence and Columbia. Kansas dominated the early series, holding a 14-4 advantage games through 1922. But Missouri's rise in the 1920s and 1930s balanced the competition. More importantly, both schools were building athletic programs that reflected their state's cultural values and historical narratives. The rivalry's intensity was evident in the traditions that developed around it. In 1937, the Indian war drum became the traveling trophy, a symbol that changed hands with each victory. The drum itself became part of the folklore. It disappeared in the 1980s, was replaced, then was later found in a Columbia basement under a pile of boxes. The original now resides in the College Football Hall of Fame. The rivalry's academic legitimacy was established in 1907 when both schools joined the same athletic conference, ensuring annual meetings in all sports. This institutional framework allowed the rivalry to develop sustained narratives and recurring characters that deepened the animosity over generations. No figure better embodied this sustained hostility than Missouri basketball coach Norm Stewart, who coached from 1967 to 1999 and became a lightning rod for Kansas hatred. Stewart's famous refusal to spend money, spend the night, or spend any time in Kansas became part of rivalry lore. Kansas fans responded with the chant, "Sit down, Norm," whenever Stewart stood during games, earning him the nickname Stormin' Norman. But it was football that provided the rivalry's most memorable modern moment. The 2007 season brought together a perfect storm of circumstances. Both teams entered their November 24th meeting ranked in the top five nationally, with Kansas at number two and Missouri at number three. The game was moved to prime time and played at Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City, the neutral site that harked back to the rivalry's earliest days. The stakes could not have been higher. After number one LSU had lost the day before, the winner would finish the regular season ranked number one in the nation. A near record crowd of 80,537 packed Arrowhead Stadium, and the television audience became the largest for any regular season college football game in 2007. Missouri won 36 to 28, climbing to number one in the national rankings for the first time. Their dream season ended a week later with a loss to Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship. But for Tiger fans, the victory over Kansas remained the defining moment. The game's aftermath revealed the historical tensions that still simmered beneath the surface. A Missouri alumnus created t shirts celebrating the victory with imagery of Lawrence burning in 1863, paired with the word scoreboard and a quote from William Quantrill: "Our cause is just, our enemies many." The controversy over these shirts was revealing. It proved that the old wounds of 1863 had never truly healed. They were just beneath the surface of the rivalry. Some Kansas fans interpreted the shirts as supporting slavery, leading to the epithet slavers being applied to Missouri by some KU supporters. The incident showed that despite 150 years of distance, the Civil War era violence still informed how the school's supporters viewed each other. The border war as a regular occurrence ended abruptly in 2012 when Missouri departed the Big 12 Conference for the SEC. The final game, played on November 26, 2011, at Arrowhead Stadium, saw Missouri win 24 to 10. Missouri's departure was driven by financial considerations and the pursuit of greater national prominence, but many Kansas fans viewed it as betrayal. Another example of Missouri putting self interest ahead of regional loyalty. The rivalry officially became the Border Showdown in 2004 when Kansas athletic director Lou Perkins declared it inappropriate to use the term war to describe athletic competition in the post 9/11 era. The name change was universally derided by both fan bases, and media outlets continued to use border war. Even the schools themselves seemed uncomfortable with the sanitized version, as the historical weight of the rivalry resisted corporate rebranding. For over a decade, the series lay dormant despite Missouri's expressed desire to continue the competition. The absence was felt deeply by both fan bases and observers of college athletics. Sports Illustrated had described it as the oldest Division I rivalry west of the Mississippi River, and its disappearance left a void in both schools' athletic calendars and cultural calendars. The renewal announced for 2025, 2026, 2031, and 2032 represents more than just the resumption of a football series. Current Kansas coach Lance Leipold has expressed surprise at the intensity of feelings the rivalry still generates. Despite coaching in multiple regions, he found the level of animosity toward Missouri among Kansas fans exceeded even their feelings toward in state rival Kansas State. What makes the Kansas Missouri rivalry distinctive among college football competitions is its foundation in actual historical violence. While many rivalries claim historical significance, few can point to specific battles, massacres, and military campaigns that directly inform their athletic competition. When Kansas and Missouri meet, they are carrying forward competing versions of American identity that were forged in violence over fundamental questions of human freedom and dignity. The football field became the arena where these historical grievances could be safely expressed, transforming the weapons of war into the rituals of sport. The story of the border war is a powerful reminder that sports are never truly separate from the world around them. They are shaped by history, culture, and conflict. I am always fascinated to learn about these connections. If there is another rivalry with a deep rooted history you believe is worth exploring, please share it in the comments.